Hi, I'm Terry Murphy for the Data Advocate. Everything seems to be happening on the national front for the National Association of Realtors, a recent lawsuit with the Department of Justice. One of our very special and secret weapons at the Data Advocate is John Riley, the author of The Language of Real Estate. In its 8th edition, it's almost 50 years old, and he is amazing. John, tell us what's going on with this lawsuit so we can bring people up to date.
Well, we've had almost 4 years litigation, but it was all behind the scenes. There hasn't been a trial yet. There have been a lot of motions to dismiss the lawsuit. NAR has not been able to win any of those motions. The trial judges there, or the motion judges, are basically saying, as long as the plaintiffs can present a plausible case at this juncture, block continuation of the action. In other words, while they'll take a look at the plaintiff's case, they really are saying to the defendants that if you really want to say that what you do is pro-competitive, not violation of the antitrust rules, you're going to have to wait for trial. Well, here's the good news. There finally is a trial date set, and it's going to be February of next year, 2023. And that's because there are two cases. One is called the Sitzer, Sitzer, and the other is the Moyler case. Now, both of these are covered in our Data Advocate. We have the transcripts there, so people will be able to dig into it. But basically, the attack is that we should do away with commission sharing. In other words, the buyer should pay buyer-broker fee, and the seller is only going to have to be obligated to pay the listing agent's fee. Well, this is really going to transform the whole business. I think it's our friend Saul Klein that came up with this little formula. Well, what's currently possible to do in your business, and if it were impossible, could fundamentally change the way you do business. And yeah, because the way it's most transactions are structured, buyer is paid by way of the listing broker sharing the commission that they receive, typically out of the financing in the transaction. I think agents are going to have to look at the fact, what if there's a ban on commission sharing? How's this going to impact your business? And so it's creating quite a stir in the industry as people are trying to figure out what's the best way to proceed. If suddenly buyer's agent cannot be paid through a sharing of the commission in a situation where a lot of the buyers are not going to be able to get representation because they can't afford to do it directly. Typically, they pay it out of the proceeds of the loan. So there's going to have to be quite a lot of emphasis on buyer agency, and in that, how can they structure the transaction so the buyer agent is going to be compensated? Because otherwise, it would be, well, back to the original day where the seller is the one who was the only one represented. There, you're going to be in a situation where you're in a kind of a dual agency. So it's going to have a big impact. Now, what a lot of brokers, buyer agents are doing, they're basically saying, okay, if they change the rule and there's no more mandatory commission sharing, what we'll do is when we submit an offer, in that offer, we're going to basically say, well, thank you, Mr. Listing Agent, for offering to pay compensation, but we reject that. What we're going to do is structure our offer so that the way we're paid, part of the contract is going to be saying that we will be getting money. You agree, seller, that if we go through with this transaction, that you agree that to direct the closing agent to direct the commission to the buyer's agent. In other words, it doesn't come from the listing agent, it's coming out of the transaction.
Big differential.
Yeah, and so the key important thing is that we'll be able to still get compensated. In a lot of ways, it's the way commercial transactions are handled.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we've been relying for years on, NAR had a situation where there was a mandatory offer of compensation. And I think the change is going to be, it's no longer going to be mandatory, because that makes it subject to antitrust claims. And it's still going to be basically voluntary, and it's going to be contractual. And this is the way a number of buyer agents are handling it now. They submit an offer and they say, well, thanks for the offer of compensation. Here's how we're going to handle compensation. You are going to direct the closing agent to disperse a certain amount out of the proceeds directly to the buyer's agent. It's not coming out of a commission sharing that was under the NAR rules. It's a matter of contract. And so what's in the offing for people, buyer's agents? You have to seriously look at structuring a buyer agency agreement. And then in your offers, you have to carefully be able to, in other words, direct the closing agent to pay the commission out of the proceeds. A lot of transactions are handled this way now, where out of the contract, the buyer is being paid and the closing costs are being paid, and it's all being paid out of the mortgage proceeds. So what's going to happen with these suits? Well, I think they're going to go on for a number of years. The big problem is they are all classified as class actions. And class actions means that any seller who was involved in the transaction during a certain period of time is eligible as a plaintiff. And you're talking about thousands and thousands of transactions.
Almost incalculable. I mean,
yeah.
And how many years, John? Going back how many years?
With the Setzer case, it goes back 8 years. And with the Moyler case, it goes back 4 years. But you can imagine just how many transactions can be qualified under those rules. And it's estimated that in one case, the Setzer case, probably because it probably affects 50 or 60,000 transactions, you're probably talking about $3.5 million in that. But then tack onto that the fact that courts can award punitive damages, triple that. When you triple that, you're into the $1 billion. And that's just the Setzer case, which only affects, in the state of Missouri, it only affects 4 MLSs. The Moyler case is countrywide, and it affects 20 MLSs. That's going to be enormous, the amount of plaintiffs be able to bring action under that particular case. So on the horizon, to wrap this up, what we are going to be looking at is a serious look at how agents who work with buyers can be represented, can be compensated, but it's going to be done out of the contract itself. It's not going to be done out of some mandatory NAR rule. And that's the key in this case is the NAR rules were mandatory. You couldn't put your listings on the MLS unless you agreed to the mandatory sharing of commissions. Now it's going to be voluntary. So everybody take a good look at how you work with buyers. Make sure it's by contract and it's discussed with the listing agent as well. It will be a new twist to representation.
That is going to take some training, some marketing awareness, some socialization, as Saul Klein likes to say, our partner. John, I just want to, in case someone's listening to this podcast and or seeing the video, 8th edition of John W. Riley for the Language of Real Estate. He's an attorney, part of the you actually did work with ePro, correct?
I did, right. Saul and I worked with ePro. You worked with ePro as well.
Well, I mean, it was a while ago, but adjunct professor of real estate law and licensed real estate instructor for both sales and brokerage, and educational consultant to the Hawaii Real Estate Commission. And by the way, that's where John lives in paradise. The rest of us just hope we get there sometime. A co-author of another book, Questions and Answers to Help You Pass the Real Estate Exam. You also, I just want to give some relevance here to the amazing amassing of information and experience that you have. In 2018, you received the Jack Whitemer Distinguished Career Award from the Real Estate Educators Association. So you have a yeoman's job of understanding real estate. We've worked together for several years with the Internet Crusade and now the Data Advocate. So I'm going to tell you, our watchers and our listeners, to go to thedataadvocate.com. You can download both of those reports, John, that you talked about. And you can also get up-to-date information on how data affects us in real estate. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Terry Murphy. Join us again.
Thanks, Terry.